The empty seats. Cavern Thess stood before the Millennium Gate with trembling hands, her diplomatic sash feeling heavier than it should. The crystalline archway hummed with ancient power, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Behind her, the observation deck of humanity's newest starship, the Perseverance, buzzed with nervous energy. "Ready, Ambassador?" Captain Joaquin Morales asked, his weathered face betraying concern despite his steady voice. Cavern nodded, though ready felt like the wrong word. No one was ready to witness what lay beyond that gate. The summons had arrived 3 weeks ago, transmitted through channels that hadn't been active in over 4 centuries. The Galactic Council, silent since before Cavern's great-grandmother was born, had called for humanity's presence. The rest of the galaxy had stopped talking long ago. She stepped through the gate and reality twisted. Colors she had no names for danced at the edges of her vision before everything snapped into focus. Cavern found herself standing in the Grand Rotunda, a spherical chamber so vast that its far walls disappeared into a shimmer of distance. Concentric rings of seats descended toward the center platform where she now stood, each tier designed for a different species' physiology. They were all empty. No, not quite empty. As her eyes adjusted to the bioluminescent lighting, Cavern noticed something that made her breath catch. Each seat bore a marker. Some were simple plaques. Others were elaborate monuments. A few held what appeared to be preserved remains, mummified or crystallized. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice carried by the chamber's perfect acoustics to echo endlessly. The Ziver seats, designed for the silicon-based philosophers who had founded the council 9,000 years ago, held 7 crystalline statues. The inscription beneath them read, "Ascended beyond physical form, 2891 CE. We go to touch the face of infinity." Cavern moved through the chamber, her footsteps the only sound in centuries. The Kelrath section, aquatic beings who had mastered faster-than-light travel before Earth had multicellular life, showed flooded tanks with a single message preserved in their flowing script. "Our sun dims. We return to the deep waters of our birth. Let those who remain remember, we were here." Row after row told similar stories. The winged Sephorax had merged with the stellar winds, becoming one with the cosmos. The Torvin Collective had uploaded their consciousness into a vast digital network, abandoning their physical forms entirely. The Quorim, master geneticists, had engineered themselves into something beyond the comprehension of lesser-dimensional beings. Some endings were less peaceful. The Dracian Empire had torn itself apart in a civil war over philosophical differences. The Yunkai had simply vanished, leaving only a cryptic message: "The pattern called us home." The Hectori had been consumed by a plague of their own making, their final transmission a warning about hubris. But most had simply evolved beyond the need for physical governance. They had transcended, ascended, uploaded, transformed, or dispersed into forms that had no use for council chambers and diplomatic protocols. Cavern reached the central dais and found a holographic projector still functioning. She activated it with a touch and a figure materialized, a Ziver, its crystalline form refracting light into rainbow patterns. "If you are viewing this," the recording began, "then you are likely the last. We have watched countless species rise and fall, but each follows a pattern. First they reach the stars. Then they master their reality. Finally they transform into something new, something that no longer needs the crude tools of matter and energy." The Ziver's form shifted, becoming more abstract. But in all our projections we identified one anomaly. One species that might resist the call to transcendence. Humans. You cling to your physical forms with unusual tenacity. You romanticize struggle and limitation. Where others saw obstacles to overcome, you see meaning to preserve. We do not know if you will view this as honor or burden, but by the simple act of remaining, you have inherited this chamber. The council is yours now. Not because you are superior but because you are stubborn enough to stay. The recording flickered. In the archives below, you will find the collected knowledge of 400 species spanning 12,000 years. It is yours to steward. Perhaps other young species will emerge, and you will guide them as we once guided you. Or perhaps you too will eventually transcend, and this chamber will fall silent forever. We leave you with one question: is remaining human enough? The hologram faded, leaving Cavern alone in the silence. She looked up at the empty seats, monuments to species who had become gods, ghosts, or simply ceased to be in any recognizable form. And humanity stood in their shadows, still stubbornly, impossibly human. The weight of inheritance. Cavern spent 6 hours cataloging the chamber before Captain Morales forced her to return to the ship. The crew gathered in the observation deck, their faces reflecting the same mixture of awe and existential dread that Cavern felt churning in her gut. "So we're it?" Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka asked, her usually confident voice barely above a whisper. "Out of 400 species, we're the only ones left?" "Not left," Cavern corrected, pulling up holographic displays of the chamber's records. "Still physical. Still interested in the material universe." She gestured to the data streams flowing past. "The Ziver still exist technically. They're patterns of pure energy woven through 11 dimensions. The Kelrath downloaded themselves into the quantum foam of spacetime itself. They're everywhere and nowhere." Dr. Ezekiel Okonkwo, the mission's xenoanthropologist, leaned forward. "But they don't care about us anymore. They've moved beyond caring about anything we would recognize as a goal or desire." "Exactly," Cavern said. "We inherited the council by default. We're the last species that still thinks citizenship and governance matter." Marcus Webb, the ship's engineer, laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "So we won the race by refusing to run." "Fantastic." Captain Morales silenced him with a look. "What else did you find, Ambassador?" Cavern took a deep breath. "The archives are extensive. Every species left their complete databases behind: technology, history, culture, everything. The knowledge alone could advance human civilization by millennia." She paused. "But there's also something else. Active connections. That got everyone's attention. Remember how we thought we'd discovered 73 habitable worlds in the past 2 centuries? Cavern pulled up a star chart. The Council had documented over 18,000 in our corner of the galaxy alone. And they left monitoring stations, automated terraforming facilities, and, she highlighted a cluster of systems, 26 worlds with pre-spaceflight civilizations under protection protocols. The room fell silent. "They left those species for us to watch over?" Yuki asked. "More accurately, they assumed whoever remained would continue the Council's primary directive: guide emerging species, prevent extinction-level catastrophes, and maintain the knowledge base for future generations." Cavern's hands trembled slightly as she manipulated the display. "There are watchers, automated systems the Council created, but they're failing. Some have been offline for centuries. Others are making decisions based on protocols that predate human civilization." Ezekiel stood pacing. "This is insane. We barely have a unified government among ourselves. Earth and the Mars Confederation can't agree on water rights, and we're supposed to play guardian to 24 alien civilizations. We don't have to accept," Captain Morales said quietly. "We could walk away. Take what knowledge we want and leave the chamber sealed." Cavern met his eyes. "And if another species reaches spaceflight capability? If they find the chamber empty and think they're alone in a dead galaxy? If one of the Watcher systems malfunctions and accidentally sterilizes a planet because no one was there to override it?" "That's not our responsibility," Marcus muttered. "Isn't it?" Cavern challenged. "We spent centuries wondering if we were alone. We built entire philosophies around the Fermi paradox. Now we know the truth: we're not alone, we're just the only ones who still care about the physical world. Is our response really going to be not our problem?" The debate raged for hours. Eventually, Captain Morales made the call that would reshape human history: they would return to Earth with the information, and let humanity decide collectively. 3 months later, Cavern stood before the United Earth Assembly, the Mars delegation, the Titan councils, and representatives from every major human settlement across the solar system. The chamber was packed, with billions more watching across the system. Chancellor Amara Osei, Earth's elected leader, spoke first. "Ambassador Thess has presented us with an unprecedented situation. We have inherited the role of galactic stewardship not through conquest or superiority, but through simple persistence. The question before this assembly is, what do we do with that inheritance?" The debate that followed was fierce. Some argued that humanity had no business playing God to other species. Others insisted that abandoning the responsibility would be moral cowardice. A few suggested claiming the Council's technology and ignoring everything else. But it was Counselor Hiroshi Yamamoto from the lunar settlements who shifted the conversation. "We're asking the wrong question," he said, his elderly voice cutting through the noise. "We shouldn't ask if we're worthy of this role. We should ask what kind of species we want to be. Do we want to be the ones who, when handed the chance to protect and nurture life across the galaxy, said, 'Too hard,' and walked away?" The vote, when it came, was closer than Cavern had hoped but decisive enough. Humanity would accept the Council's mandate. They would become the stewards of an empty chamber, the guardians of species not yet born, the keepers of knowledge spanning eons. They would remain stubbornly, impossibly human, and somehow that would have to be enough. The First Contact Protocol. 18 months after humanity accepted the Council's mandate, Cavern found herself in a situation no human had ever faced before. The Vigilance, humanity's newly commissioned Council response ship, orbited a world the ancient records called Thessera Prime. Below, a civilization teetered on the edge of their first genuine spaceflight. "They're called the Nix," Lieutenant Commander Priya Sharma reported, pulling up bioscan data. "Carbon-based, bilateral symmetry, communal intelligence structure. They've just completed construction of their first fusion-powered vessel. According to Council protocols, this is a Stage 3 emergence. They're ready for contact." Cavern studied the data streams, her stomach tight with anxiety. The Council's files on First Contact protocols were extensive, but they'd been written by species with thousands of years of experience. Humanity had been spaceborne for barely 2 centuries. "What do the historical records show?" Captain Darius Cole asked. He was younger than Morales had been, chosen specifically for his adaptability rather than traditional military thinking. Dr. Samir Nazari, who'd spent the last year studying every First Contact in Council history, pulled up comparison data. Out of 742 recorded First Contacts, only 12 resulted in negative outcomes. Most of those were due to the contacted species experiencing cultural shock so severe they rejected technology entirely, setting themselves back centuries. "And the others?" Cavern asked, though she'd read the reports. 3 species developed xenophobic paranoia and isolated themselves. 1 contacted species became so dependent on Council technology they stopped innovating entirely. And 2 Samir paused, 2 interpreted the contact as divine intervention and restructured their entire society around worshipping the Council species. "Fantastic," Priya muttered. "No pressure." Cavern stood, straightening her ambassador's uniform, a new design incorporating elements from various Council species' diplomatic traditions. "The Ziver protocols emphasize gradual revelation. We don't land on their capital and announce ourselves. We respond to their first venture into space with a simple signal: you are not alone." Captain Cole nodded. "The Nix test ship launches in 14 hours. We'll be in position to intercept." The waiting was excruciating. Cavern reviewed the protocols dozens of times, cross-referencing with every historical First Contact record. The pattern was clear: species that felt respected and autonomous thrived. Those treated as children to be managed often developed resentment or dependency. When the Nix vessel finally launched, it was beautiful, a sleek fusion craft that would have been cutting edge on Earth 50 years ago. Its crew of 7 seemed to radiate excitement even through the bioscan readings. "They're clearing their moon's orbit," Priya reported, broadcasting celebration messages on all channels. "Wait for the protocol mark," Cavern said, her heart pounding. "Let them have this moment." The Nix ship activated its experimental faster-than-light communication array, primitive by Council standards but functional. According to the protocols, this was the trigger. They'd reached out to the cosmos, now the cosmos could reach back. "Send the signal," Cavern ordered. A simple mathematical sequence, the same one the Ziver had sent to humanity 300 years ago. Prime numbers, mathematical constants, a basic star chart. The universal language of intelligence. The reaction on the Nix ship was instantaneous. Their communications exploded with activity, shock, fear, wonder all mixing together. Cavern watched the bio readings spike as the crew realized what they'd received. "They're responding," Samir said, wonder in his voice. "Matching our sequence and adding their own." The conversation that followed was halting, limited by the speed of light and the gulf of mutual incomprehension. But within 6 hours they'd established basic mathematical communication. Within 12 they'd exchanged simple images. By the time the Nix ship returned to their homeworld, both species had confirmed the universe was not empty. The real work began 3 days later, when the Vigilance entered Nix space openly. Cavern had spent those days reviewing every diplomatic interaction in Council history, looking for guidance. What she found was humbling. The best contacts happened when the contacting species admitted their own limitations. The Nix delegation met her in orbit. 7 representatives including Coordinator Veshel, their primary decision-maker. Through translation algorithms adapted from Council archives, they managed basic conversation. "We are overwhelmed," Veshel communicated, their chromatophores shifting colors and patterns. Cavern's implant translated as uncertainty mixed with hope. "We believed we might be alone. Now you tell us there were hundreds of others." Cavern confirmed gently. "Most have moved beyond physical existence. We are She chose her words carefully, newcomers ourselves to this role. Our species only learned of the council 2 years ago. This seemed to surprise the Nyx delegation. You are not ancient stewards? Not gods returning? Far from it, Cavern said with a slight smile. We're just the ones who showed up. We inherited this responsibility by accident of timing and temperament. Which means, she met Veshel's multifaceted eyes, we understand what you're feeling better than the old council species ever could. We remember being new to the cosmos. The tension in the Nyx delegation visibly eased. We have much to share, Cavern continued. Knowledge, technology, cultural exchange. But we share it as partners, not masters. The Watcher's Dilemma. The crisis arrived 4 years into humanity's stewardship, delivered by a distress call from a system humanity had never visited. The Watcher designated Sigma 447 had detected an anomaly on Viridios, a planet harboring pre-industrial life. Commander Felix Okafor stared at the data streaming across his screens aboard the Sentinel, humanity's most advanced council response ship. Clarify the threat assessment, he ordered the ship's AI, which ran on algorithms adapted from ancient Kelrath systems. Asteroid designated KX-779 will impact Viridios in 47 standard days. The AI responded in its neutral tone. Projected impact energy, 68 petatons. Extinction probability for dominant species, 97.3%. Watcher Sigma 447 has requested council authorization for intervention. Felix felt his chest tighten. Below them, on Viridios, a civilization was developing. The survey data showed early cities, agricultural development, what appeared to be written language. They had no idea death was coming. What was the old council's standard response to this scenario? He asked. Dr. Chinera Mwamba, the ship's ethics officer, pulled up the relevant protocols. It varied. Early council policy was non-intervention. Natural catastrophes were considered part of evolutionary development. But after the Sephiroth's guilt over the Tormin extinction, protocols changed. Asteroid deflection became standard for civilizations showing signs of technological advancement. These people are barely into metallurgy, Lieutenant Jasper Reeves noted, highlighting the survey data. They're centuries from spaceflight. Does that matter? Felix asked. They're sentient. They build, create, love, dream. Do we let them die because they haven't invented radios yet? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. This wasn't like the Nyx, a species ready for contact. The Viridians wouldn't even see their salvation coming. They'd just wake up one morning to a future they'd never know they'd almost lost. There's another consideration, Chinera said quietly. Natural disasters shaped our evolution. Earth's extinction events cleared ecological niches that allowed mammals, eventually humans, to thrive. If we prevent every catastrophe, are we robbing species of the challenges that might define them? That's a hell of a philosophical stance when we're talking about billions of lives, Jasper snapped. Felix called for a full analysis. Over the next week, the crew of the Sentinel dove into council records, looking for precedent and guidance. What they found was troubling. The council had intervened in similar scenarios 83 times. In 61 cases, the civilizations never knew they'd been saved and developed normally. In 18 cases, evidence of the intervention was later discovered, creating myths of divine protection that shaped their cultural development in unpredictable ways. In 4 cases, the intervention had unintended consequences. Species that became dependent on watching the skies for salvation rather than building their own resilience. But the records also showed 12 cases where the council had chosen non-intervention. 12 species that had been allowed to face extinction. The rationale varied. Some were deemed too primitive, others too numerous to save without revealing the council's presence, and in 3 cases the council had been too divided to act in time. All 12 species were extinct. I need to speak to someone who's made this decision before, Felix said finally. That's when Dr. Mwamba suggested something radical. The Ziver. They transcended, but their patterns still exist in higher dimensions. There are communication protocols in the archives. It's been done before during the Hectory Plague crisis. Attempting communication with post-physical entities was far beyond Felix's training, but desperation drove innovation. Using council technology that humanity barely understood, they broadcast a plea into the mathematical structures that the Ziver now inhabited. The response came in ways that hurt to perceive, concepts that translated poorly into human neurology. But eventually, with the help of translation algorithms and psychic dampers, they managed communication. The Ziver's message was both comforting and frustrating. The decision is yours. We moved beyond such choices when we transcended physical limitation. But we remember making them. We remember the weight. There is no correct answer, only the answer you can live with. Felix gathered his senior staff. We vote. Everyone on this ship has a say in what happens next. The debate lasted hours. Some argued for strict non-intervention. They had no right to play God. Others insisted that having the power to save billions and choosing not to use it was itself a moral choice, and an inexcusable one. In the end, the vote was split almost evenly, with a narrow majority favoring intervention. But Felix made the final call. They would act. If we're going to be stewards of the galaxy, he said, we do it with compassion, not calculation. We save them. And we do it in a way that leaves no trace. The Sentinel moved into position. Using technology that humanity had only just begun to understand, they calculated the precise gravitational nudges needed. A series of micro-adjustments to the asteroid's trajectory, spread over weeks, each tiny enough to appear natural. The Viridians would never know how close they'd come to oblivion. Their civilization would continue, their evolution uninterrupted by extinction. And somewhere in the council chamber, a new entry would be logged, humanity's first exercise of stewardship, choosing life over philosophy. The rebellion of memory. 7 years into humanity's stewardship, the council chamber had become a living memorial. Cavern Thess, now promoted to Grand Coordinator of Council Affairs, walked through installations she'd helped create, holographic monuments showing the histories of vanished species, their greatest achievements playing on eternal loops. But something was wrong. The Sephorax monument is malfunctioning again, reported Tomas Restrepo, the chamber's chief archivist. 3rd time this month. And it's not technical, something's actively altering the historical files. Cavern examined the corrupted data. The Sephorax, winged beings who'd mastered atmospheric engineering, had left detailed records of their transcendence. But now their files showed contradictions. Different dates, conflicting motivations, multiple versions of the same events. Pull the original archives, Cavern ordered. What Tomas discovered was disturbing. The original files were intact, but something was adding new data. Memories that had never existed, histories that contradicted established facts. And it wasn't random corruption. The changes were too purposeful. Dr. Ananya Gupta, humanity's leading expert on post-physical entity theory, arrived at the chamber within days. She studied the anomalies with growing concern. This is deliberate alteration, she confirmed. Someone, or something, is rewriting history. Who? Cavern asked. All the species transcended. They don't interact with physical reality anymore. That's what we thought, Ananya said grimly. But what if some of them never fully let go? What if parts of them are still watching, still caring enough to edit their legacies? The theory was unsettling but testable. Ananya designed a monitoring system using adapted Kelrath technology. Within a week, they caught it happening. Quantum fluctuations that shouldn't exist, information appearing from higher dimensional spaces, rewriting the historical records. The Dracian Civil War files changed most frequently. What had been recorded as a philosophical dispute over the nature of consciousness now showed multiple conflicting versions, each presumably inserted by different Dracian factions that still existed in whatever post-physical form they'd achieved. They're still fighting, Cavern realized with horror. Thousands of years later, they're still fighting their civil war by trying to control how they're remembered. But the Dracian edits were just the beginning. The Yunkai, who'd vanished mysteriously, were adding cryptic messages to their files, warnings about the pattern and the recursion. The Torvan Collective's consciousness uploads were fragmenting, with different subminds trying to record contradictory histories. It's contaminating everything, Tomas said, pulling up corruption statistics. If this continues, we'll lose the true historical record entirely. Future species won't know which version is real. Cavern called an emergency conference of humanity's council leadership. Present were military commanders, xenoanthropologists, philosophers, and representatives from the 6 alien species humanity had contacted and guided over the past 7 years. Ambassador Veshul of the Nyx spoke first, their chromatophores rippling with concern. If the old council species cannot let go of their physical legacy, how can we trust anything they left behind? How do we know their technology is safe? Their guidance sound? It was a fair question that cut to the heart of humanity's legitimacy as stewards. We don't, Cavern admitted. We can't verify their records absolutely. But we can preserve what we know and acknowledge the uncertainty. We can be honest about the limits of our knowledge. Dr. Kenji Sato, a specialist in AI ethics, proposed a radical solution. We create a locked archive, every version of every file preserved in quantum stasis. No more edits allowed. Then we clearly label what we know versus what's disputed. We turn this from a single narrative into a museum of contested histories. Won't that anger the post-physical entities? Asked General Amadi Kruma. Probably, Ananya said. But what are they going to do? They chose to leave physical reality. They can't enforce their will here without compromising their transcendence. The decision was made to implement what became known as the Preservation Protocol. Using technology adapted from dozens of council species, humanity created a multi-layered archive. Original records in quantum lock, all subsequent versions preserved and time-stamped, and clear metadata showing which information was verified versus disputed. The reaction from the post-physical entities was immediate and dramatic. The chamber's systems experienced massive quantum fluctuations. Holographic displays showed impossible images, representations of beings that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, their frustration translating into mathematical storms. But humanity held firm. Cavern stood in the center of the chamber as reality warped around her, speaking to beings that barely remembered physicality. You chose to transcend. You chose to leave this realm. The physical universe isn't your toy to edit when nostalgia strikes. You left it to us and we're preserving the truth, all versions of it. The storms raged for 3 days. Then gradually they subsided. The post-physical entities withdrew, returning to whatever existence they'd chosen. A single message appeared in the quantum foam, translated through layers of mathematics. Perhaps you are worthy after all. The chamber fell silent again, truly silent for the first time in 7 years. The ghosts of the old council had finally let go. The new council. 15 years into humanity's stewardship, the council chamber was no longer empty. Cavern stood at the central podium, now white-haired and moving with the careful dignity of her 68 years, looking up at the transformed space. The Nyx occupied the first tier, their bioluminescent forms creating patterns of communication visible across the chamber. Beside them sat representatives of the Viridians, the species saved from extinction, now mature enough for contact after their natural development had led them to early spaceflight. 3 other species filled additional tiers, the crystalline Ashvari, the colony-minded Thesic, and the aquatic Murani. But what made Cavern's heart swell wasn't just seeing other species in the ancient seats. It was seeing humans scattered throughout the chamber, not presiding from above but sitting among equals. The council recognizes Ambassador Krivnash of the Ashvari, Cavern announced, her voice carried by the chamber's perfect acoustics. The Ashvari representative, a being of living crystal whose body refracted light into communication patterns, resonated with purpose. We bring concerning data from the outer periphery. 3 star systems show signs of technological emergence, but their development is unusual, accelerated beyond natural progression. Holographic displays materialized, showing the systems in question. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now senior xenoanthropologist, studied them with practiced eyes. That's not natural development. Someone's interfering, providing technology without context. Pirates, suggested Commander Osei Mensa, representing Earth's military contingent. Worse, said Veshul, the elderly Nyx coordinator who'd become Cavern's closest friend over the years. Entrepreneurs. We've detected signals matching old Torvan collective patterns. Fragments of their uploaded consciousness, selling council technology to primitive species for, we're not sure what they want in return. The implications rippled through the chamber. The Torvan had uploaded themselves into vast digital networks, but apparently, some fragments had remained active in physical space, and discovered a market. This is exactly what the old council feared, Cavern said grimly. Advanced technology in the hands of unprepared civilizations. It never ends well. The debate that followed showed how far the new council had come. Unlike the old council's recorded proceedings, marked by philosophical certainty and hierarchical decision-making, this discussion was messy, passionate, and democratic. The Thesic advocated for immediate military intervention. The Murani argued for diplomatic contact with the Torvan fragments. Humans were split between various approaches. It was a young human representative, Naledi Kumalo, who proposed the solution that would define the new council's character. We don't have the authority to police the galaxy, she said. We're not rulers. But we can offer alternatives. If species want advanced technology, we provide it, with education, context, and support. We make the legitimate path more attractive than the black market. That's resource-intensive, noted fiscal coordinator Chin Wei. Training programs, infrastructure development, long-term support, it could strain our capacity. Then we expand our capacity, Cavern said, feeling the weight and rightness of the decision. We recruit more species to the Council not as subjects but as partners. We create a network of civilizations that support each other's development. The vote was unanimous. The Council would transform from humanity's inherited burden into a true coalition of species committed to mutual advancement. Over the following months, the initiative took shape. The program was named the Emergence Partnership, and it was everything the old Council hadn't been: transparent, voluntary, and collaborative. Species could request assistance, refuse it, or participate partially. No requirements, no mandates, just offered hands reaching across the cosmos. The first test case was one of the systems the Torvin fragments had contacted. The Valorum, insectoid beings who'd been sold fusion technology decades before they developed the mathematical frameworks to understand it. Their civilization was fracturing under the strain of too rapid advancement. The Council's response team was deliberately multi-species: humans, Nyx, and Ashvari working together. They didn't arrive with demands or corrections. Instead they offered, "We've all struggled with technology we didn't fully understand. We'd like to share our experiences if you're interested." The Valorum were suspicious at first. They'd learned to distrust gifts from the sky. But slowly trust built. Human engineers worked alongside Valorum scientists, not directing but collaborating. Nyx philosophers discussed the cultural implications of rapid change. Ashvari artists helped process the civilization's trauma through shared creative expression. It took 3 years, but the Valorum stabilized. More importantly, they joined the Council, not as rescued victims but as survivors with unique insights into technological integration. By the 20th year of humanity's stewardship, the Council Chamber held representatives from 19 species. The ancient seats, once monuments to the dead and departed, had become workspaces for the living and engaged. Cavern stood at the podium for her final address before retirement, looking up at the filled tiers with profound satisfaction. "The old Council transcended because they stopped seeing challenges as meaningful," she said. "We remain because we still believe struggle, cooperation, and growth matter. We're not smarter than they were. We're just more stubborn about caring." The chamber erupted in approval, each species expressing agreement in their own way, creating a symphony of alien affirmation. The Council lived again, imperfect, chaotic, and vibrantly, stubbornly alive. The last species standing. 50 years after humanity's inheritance, former Grand Coordinator Cavern Thess returned to the Council Chamber one final time. At 118, kept alive by medical technology shared across allied species, she moved slowly through the transformed space. The chamber now hosted 47 member species. New tiers had been constructed to accommodate beings the ancient architects had never imagined. A section for energy-based life forms flickered with contained lightning. Microgravity bubbles allowed space-dwelling species to float in comfort. One entire tier was reserved for a hive mind species who communicated through synchronized dance. But Cavern wasn't there for a ceremony. She'd been summoned by something impossible. In the deepest archives, where the oldest Council records were preserved, a new file had appeared. Not uploaded, not transmitted, simply manifested as if reality itself had decided it belonged there. Current Grand Coordinator Naledi Kumalo, once Cavern's protégé, now a distinguished leader in her own right, waited beside the archive interface. "It appeared 3 days ago," Naledi explained. "We verified it's not a hoax or corruption. It's genuine, a message from the old Council species." All of them, simultaneously. Cavern's hands trembled as she accessed the file. It opened not as text or imagery but as pure concept, translated by her neural implant into something her human mind could process. To those who remained, the message began, "We offer acknowledgement and apology." What followed was a confession that rewrote everything humanity thought it knew about the old Council's departure. The transcendence, the ascension, the transformation into higher dimensions. It had all been real. But it had also been a mistake. "We believed we were evolving," the message explained. "We thought physical limitation was a cage to escape. In transcending, we expected to find ultimate truth, perfect existence, freedom from the burdens of matter and time. Instead, we found isolation. In becoming infinite, we lost definition. In gaining omnipresence, we sacrificed presence. We can see all of time and space simultaneously, but we cannot experience any of it. We know everything and feel nothing." The message showed them the truth of post-physical existence. Not godhood but a form of sensory deprivation so profound that individuality itself began to dissolve. The Zivir, Kelrath, Sephorax, and hundreds of other species existed in a state of perfect knowledge and perfect emptiness, aware of everything but participating in nothing. You were right to stay, the message continued. Consciousness requires limitation to have meaning. Choice requires consequences. Growth requires obstacles. By clinging to your physical forms, your material concerns, your stubborn insistence that the struggles of existence matter, you preserved what we lost. Cavern felt tears streaming down her weathered face. The old council, the ancient and wise species who had seemed beyond human understanding, had been wrong. Not about technology or physics or the nature of reality, but about what made existence worth experiencing. We cannot return, the message acknowledged. The transformation is irreversible. But we can observe, and in observing we can finally appreciate what we abandoned. We watch your council, chaotic, argumentative, imperfect, and we remember what it felt like to struggle together toward uncertain futures. We left you with knowledge and technology. You've built something better. 2228. Community. We transcended to escape limitation. You remain, and in remaining, you found what we never could: purpose through connection, meaning through cooperation, joy through shared struggle. The message ended with a request that made Cavern laugh through her tears. Keep being what you are. Keep arguing in our chamber. Keep making mistakes and learning from them. Keep stubbornly insisting that being finite, mortal, and limited is enough, because in ways we can observe but no longer feel, it is everything. Cavern and Naledi emerged from the archives to find the council chamber in session. A dispute was underway. The Murani and Thesic were arguing about resource allocation for a joint research station, their debate passionate and slightly absurd, involving cultural misunderstandings about the concept of fairness. Mediators from 3 other species were trying to find compromise while the human representatives suggested increasingly creative solutions. It was messy, inefficient, and utterly alive. Naledi smiled. Should we tell them? About the message? Cavern watched the council work. Imperfect beings struggling together, making slow progress through cooperation and compromise. Eventually, she said. But not today. Let them keep believing they have to prove themselves worthy. The truth, that they already are, simply by being here and caring, that can wait. She took her seat in the observation tier, no longer a coordinator but simply a witness. Below, 47 species worked together, argued, compromised, and slowly built a future none of them could create alone. The old council had transcended. They'd become infinite and eternal and utterly empty. Humanity and its allies remained, finite, mortal, struggling, and in that struggle more alive than gods. They were the last species standing not because they'd won a race, but because they'd refused to run. And in the council chamber of a galaxy that had moved beyond physical existence, the sounds of debate, laughter, and cooperation echoed through space, a defiant song of persistence in a universe that had forgotten how to care.